modern, and that we should go back after the Renaissance. And the main moment is really when you deal with India, the first and after the second industrialization. It's absolutely, you would say the same in Brazil, or it's really, even so in Brazil, you would also say the same, that it began earlier, the modern, with the discoveries. This is the modern after the Renaissance. But when you speak about modern art, you really, I never saw in any museum a work from the 17th century or we know it's a modern moment after the Renaissance. But modern art is beginning when artists begin to say they want to be modern. They want to do different from those before. And in a very affirmative and conscious way. This is the paradigm, it's very self-conscious, the modern, for visual arts.
Yes. My name is Raju Raman. I'm coming back to your own question, which you used during your lecture. You said perhaps it will come up for discussion later. Why Doha? You mentioned Doha, and you said probably you might want to know why Doha. I'm asking that same question, why Doha? Because I also went to a wonderful museum, the Louvre in Abu Dhabi also recently. So maybe you could come back to that, which you mentioned in your own talk.
So when you also mentioned Abu Dhabi, now we're opening a little more the perspective of what I wanted to touch, because when you mentioned Abu Dhabi, you mentioned the cultural policy in the Gulf. And if we wanted to be smart, and it's a very bizarre word for a country which is not smart, we should include Saudi, which is part of the deal. And so it's clear that on one end you have a cultural project which is absolutely solidarian of an economical and military project. It's quite clear, I think we know that. And we think whatever we want about that. And in this context, you have to be very precise. And in the specific case of Doha, you can say that it began early. The earlier one being Emirates, which is Sharjah, with very different ideas, and different, Sharjah being one of the 7 Emirates, Sharjah being an Emirates with a very educated ruler, and Sharjah being from the 7 Emirates, the only one which is from a family which is not Bedouin. They were Corsairs, they were really people from the sea, and they were people who were fighters. And you would see in the daily life of the daily political life of Emirates, Sharjah is always a very specific position. And second, Sharjah decided very early in the 70s to develop a very strong cultural policy and to have a very specific bond, which was what was left from the very interesting Egyptian culture of nationalist and Assyrian developed from the 50s on. And Sharjah was very, people don't know that because people are not paying much attention, but Sharjah was very early allying with a certain part of the Muslim Brothers in order to be against the Wahhabi. The Muslim Brothers not being the bunch of hysterical people which are simplified and publicized today, the Muslim Brothers being part of a very early anti-colonial movement, and religious of course, but first of all anti-colonial in Egypt from the 20s on. I'm speaking about Tariq Ramadan grandfather. So, it's a very, very, when you enter into the detail, it's a very complex story. And Abu Dhabi has a very different one, because it's big museums. It's like, in Sharjah, the idea was to develop inside and to open. Abu Dhabi, it's a very prestige attitude to invite a brand, which is Musée du Louvre, and to develop a prestigious museum, and after we'll see what will happen. I know quite well, I worked in Abu Dhabi for a while. In between, I didn't want to, I took a leave and I wanted to become an Emirati servant, civil servant, because if not, why leaving French civil servant for becoming an Emirati civil servant? But I was quite often, and it's absolutely clear that the policies, you have very different nuance in the policies, and the Musée du Louvre is again for the prestige, and we'll see what's happening. But there is a moment that we'll have to find the right audience, because what do you do when the locals are so few? When the tourists are so interested in going into the desert and on the beach and so on and so forth, what do you do where your elite, so the local elite is very small, 13%, and not all the elite, so the local elite is an elite out of 30% locals, Emirati. They are very wealthy, many of them, and when they want to see modern art or art, they go to Paris, they go to London, they go to New York. So it's a very complicated story. When we would go back to Qatar, it's a different, it was after Sharjah, a more prestigious, it's a small family, a lot of money, especially when they began to deal with the very, very big reserve of gas they have. And Qatar decided for prestigious institutions. So it began, they heard about Louvre Abu Dhabi, so they began with the Musée Islamique, which is a very, very ambitious project by, don't remember his first name, Pei, the Chinese-American architect, a very important collection which was built very fast and quite well because a lot of money, and which is very interesting because it's Islamic work mainly from Asian countries, which is not the dominant in Europe. But what you see now is that it's, again, it's a small country. You have, as I say often, a few pilots in the plane, so certain kind of decisions are taken faster. And you have a few players, including, one is passed away in London, so Sheikh Mohammed Al-Thani, the one who built the Museum of Islamic Art, who was really a connoisseur and so on. And you have Sheikh Hassan Al-Thani, his brother, who was more and is more still in modern art, and Mataf collection, it's his collection. And it's a collection which is, again, very articulated, still improved, and it's a very interesting museum, I have to say, and it was for many years, it's running from 10 years now, not really the audience you would expect first because it's very small. Qatar, you have 3 million people and maybe, like Emirates, 13 or 14 locals, and the rest are, and I won't say all, because you have 2 levels. You have the workers and the expat. It's not exactly the same thing. I never mix because for me it's very different to be an expat and to be a worker. So you don't have the same conditions. We have to be serious and honest when you are speaking about that. But what is also, when I was discussing this, let's discuss, is that when you see that it's always like a double agenda and it's quite clear, because I saw a few, and I won't mention them because they might be not so good for them, but when you speak with few key Arab intellectuals, they would tell you. I was speaking with one recently, and I think his point was quite interesting. I said, yeah, but what are you doing here? And he said, Catherine, you had the Messens. The Arab world is in a disastrous situation. It will last what it will last, but we need Qatar for the artist, for a certain kind of intellectual project. And what is happening, for instance, in Doha, is that you have one official institute, which is Qatari institute, which is inheriting this kind of very academic now Egyptian culture from the 50s, and you have behind, it's always like the double agenda, one much less. Now, this one is Foundation of Qatari Foundation. And you have behind, not secret, but discreet, another institute, which is called Qatari Institute, which is, which have more or less the same kind of very, very sharp cultural policy, New York, Abu Dhabi, NYU, New York University in Abu Dhabi, as in Abu Dhabi, and really inviting the sharpest researchers. And you understand a little bit the ambition when you know that one of the, or the dean now, is Azmi Bishara, the Palestinian political leader who has been, he left Israel because he was risking a life sentence for high treason of the country. So, it's a very so of course you have political and geopolitical interest. Of course you have the fact that these families are really sitting on a very uncomfortable position, but it's a little bit too fast to just be despising and thinking that nothing is happening, because you have certain very, very layered agendas, and some potentially interesting. I don't know if I answered your question well.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. We are almost out of time, but at this point, I will just abuse my privilege as a moderator to ask what will be the last question. And my question actually takes off from Professor Tapodi Goyathakurta's point, partly from Raju's and your response, is that you have spoken about so many museums of modern art, and the big elephants in the room are, of course, the Pompidou Center and MoMA. One in France, which has, which has a history as one of the global empires, like Britain, to a slightly lesser extent. The other is the United States, which is a multicultural country, notwithstanding Donald Trump. It's a multicultural country which has never been explicitly an empire, but it has its own engagement with imperial things and so on and so forth. But you have also encountered these modernities in India, in China. In Indian history, we talk about colonial modernities, and we are, you talked about, and we discussed a post-colonial modern museum at the modern moment. You have also curated exhibitions in the Arab world, in much of Islamic Central Asia. You have done this landmark exhibition on Arab representations. You have done exhibitions all over. And I was just wondering how, do you have exhibitions on these in the Euro-American world as well as the Arab world? So, did you have to work, or do you need to work in different discursive structures insofar as the cultural politics of curation and modernities in these worlds are concerned? How are the modern moments imagined and discussed and incorporated into the curation of these exhibitions in the Arab world, for instance?
Of course, that's why it's very interesting, but it's also very tiring, because you have to, it's like you begin, and sometimes you do, you better do it consciously, but you have many things happening at the same time, and you have really to build up a kind of mapping of situations, because it's very complex sometimes. You have to be a little bit aware of where you are putting your feet. For instance, when you work in Qatar, you have to be very aware of certain possible censorship, but instead of being, because I think it's always, censorship is not just our world, and you have many different levels. So I know that you have to give a list of works, and you discuss, you negotiate. And the only time I really made a scandal is when, after having a very difficult moment with the artist, okay, they leave it and we'll show it in London, and that's fine, they came back. And if I said, okay, I understand, I'm in Qatar, I played the game, I went to the censorship team and so on, and we took away the work to say, this is coming now, you are unprofessional. And I went to shake and I said, this is unprofessional. So I know where I am, but I don't take that because this is not professional. One, that's what I call to be political. Second, I think that these problems are coming from a very special, for a very special reason. Your intermediary people, and this is very often in Abu Dhabi, it would be more the Lebanese who are much more, they know how to move fast. But in Qatar, it's more Turkish and North American, meaning people, they are there because they want to keep their position, and they want to keep their very good salaries, and they want to be nice, and they are very obsequious, And I told Sheikh, I'm very sorry, but these people are really playing a very bad game, and they make you looking more stupid than you are, because you go to any ruling house, and of course you can have any nude you want, and Shirazad, they know that it's Women are very rarely well dressed in Shahrazad and so on. So you have this is one issue, and after you have situations where, in Lebanon, when I really began to work in Lebanon, at the time you had no museums, or museums of antiquity and so on, and the artists were working. It was more the Shantiniketan way, meeting, and I remember amazing meetings in the very small grocery shop of Tony Shaka's mother, and we were sitting on boxes of washing powder, and it was very different from what it is now, because in the meantime you had galleries, you had the market, you had a certain kind of ideologization of the production and so on and so forth. So of course it's really, you have to, and for me, I never transport my museum with me, so I'm very flexible. Till the moment where the integrity of the project is not respected. But of course we are working under very, very different conditions. But again, I like to be very critical and to make differences. But for me, the collection of Mataf is more interesting for me than Bargil, which is a little bit of tutti frutti. And for giving you an example, we are trying to do an exhibition with Farid Belkaya, he passed away, a Moroccan artist, very important began to work in the late 50s. And if we could have 2/3 of the exhibition coming from Mataf. So it's what I call a very serious, systematical collecting major works. And you don't do that just because you want to be cool and fun and being a beautiful museum. It has to do with a minimum trust for your team, that you are working with good people, and Sheikh Hassan is not a ruler, but he's a collector. So as soon as you can work with a serious collector, it's one thing. After each time it's different. So Cairo was completely different. Iraq, we did it from Amman, because it was very dangerous to be in Iraq, and most of the people were going back and forth. And you have, I think it's really, how to say that? The problem is that it works for art as in many, many countries, societies are much more ahead than, in Iran, it's obvious. People were asking me, Catherine, is it tough? No, it's so really, I won't say funny, it's not always funny, but it's very interesting and very alive to be in Tehran, at least. It's, it's not boring at all, and it's a very, very alive and very reactive society. And I would say the same as societies are very often much ahead of the regime, of the political system. The artists are very often part of the best the society can offer. So really, people there. So when you see people doing their best, or trying to give their best in situations which are not always ideal, or you adapt. That's what I could say. It's very pragmatical, but it's my way of doing. You adapt.
Ma'am, you mentioned several times about Shantiniketan in your lecture. Why not the other places of India?
Well, I went to many other places, but Shantiniketan is really, I mentioned several times, because I think it's very important for me when you want to make understandable the diversity of the modern dynamics. It doesn't work only with a canonical museum of modern art. That's all I wanted to say. I'm not obsessed, even though, you have worse obsessions than something.
Thank you so much. Thank you. That's been a fascinating talk and interaction session. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Catherine David.
I would just like to add a word over here. Apart from Catherine David, we would like to also, with gratitude, acknowledge the presence of our other French connections this evening. Madame Virginie Coteval, Honorable Consul General of France in Kolkata, thank you very much for being with us. Monsieur Fabrice Plasson, the Director of the Alliance Française du Bengal here. And Madame Raka Sen, the president of the Alliance Française de Bengal. So I just thought that before we leave, we will flaunt our other French connections for this evening. Yeah. And of course, during the course of the evening, we talked a lot about modern museums and so on, museums of modern art. We also realized that we are truly living in modern times, where the audiences sometimes feel a little powerless without PowerPoint presentations. So thank you very much and good night.